Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of Drop the Bass, checking out songs that feature a bass of sorts. I kind of figured most of this stuff was going to be electric bass, but this is actually the second one that looks like we're getting some double bass. We're going to be looking at a cover of a Squarepusher track. It was described to me as a whole trio that does a great job of recreating one of Squarepusher's classics, and that the person requested it loved that they used an upright bass to play drum and bass. So that's kind of interesting right there. I guess we're taking more of an acoustic approach to covering an electronic song. Let's dive into this. I guess the band is called Torch, or maybe the group is called Torch. I looked and I couldn't find anything. The channel name is called This Is Torch, though. We're going to look at a cover of A Journey to Reedham. Let's dive in, see where they're taking us today. Dude, all of the ghost notes on that snare. That roll was clean. Shifting accent patterns. Trying to place this song harmonically too, and I'm having a tough time with that. The piano part's all over the place. That's a fun melody. Pulling it way back. Dang. Dude, that was intense. Intense. Okay. Here's something interesting about this. Very rigid rhythmic structure. The drums, we're going to ignore them for a second. They're kind of off in their own world sometimes, doing their own thing rhythmically. But when we look at the bass and the piano, it's a lot of eighth notes over and over and over. It can get a little repetitive. Towards the end of the song, I think I started to feel it. 7 minutes of this one rhythmic pattern. But for the most part, this track doesn't really wear me down in the way that, say, black metal does. And so in the middle of this track, I started thinking about this. I was trying to figure out why. What's different here? Part of it, I think, is timbre. I find the sounds of these instruments more palatable to my ear. But I think another one is variety outside of rhythm. I mean, when you listen to the piano, they're dancing around things harmonically, always going in new directions, just keeping things spicy on the harmonic level. There's also the shifting accent points where the piano, we have ba 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 bum, all of them sort of on downbeats, and then bum 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 pushing towards the offbeats. So we have shifting rhythmic pulses. It is a consistency of rhythm, but what parts of the beat are accented are shifting constantly throughout this song. So despite having a static rhythm, we still have a dynamic feel of rhythm. That also changes. And on that same vein, though, I think it's impossible to disregard what the drums are doing here. They are adding so much rhythmic flair to this that even if 60% of the band is playing one single idea, the drums are a bit more expressive. Now, the drums also play a lot of 16th notes too, but they're just constantly using all parts of their kit, not just changing up accent patterns, which they certainly do as well. We get some really wild layered accent patterns between what the piano is doing and what the drums are doing, but the drums also give us a plethora of sounds. We have dynamic elements in volume, we have dynamic elements in timbre. The toms sound different than the snare, sounds different than all of the different cymbals. They all have their own feeling too. Even though the drums keep a consistent rhythmic flow, again, a lot of eighth notes back to back, it's broken up in a way that you don't really feel that. In a lot of ways, this is taking that same foundation of black metal of pick a rigid rhythmic pattern and then just stick with it for an elongated amount of times, but where black metal sort of uses that to create a wall of sound and sort of allow the listener to be absorbed into that, this is doing the polar opposite, trying to make that as dynamic and contrasty as it can, so that despite the rhythmic rigidity, it seems very expressive and fluid and dynamic. And I think that's what works for me subjectively. It's what makes this song kind of stick around and stay fresh for a longer time than black metal tends to do for me. Kind of makes me wonder what would happen if we took a black metal song and transposed it or even arranged it for a jazz rhythm section, or no, actually, yeah, jazz rhythm section, because that's what we got here: piano, bass, and drums. I think that would be really interesting to see what comes of that. kind of sprucing it up for the acoustic instrumentation as well. Yeah, that would be a fun experiment to see how much of my hypothesis here actually holds up. Maybe it is more of a compositional thing than a performance thing, but I don't really know. But yes, I do want to point that out. The whole song is just like one long series of eighth notes. It's something I've railed on in the past, and I found this to be quite a bit more approachable. The hurdle was less high, and I could get into this a lot better. But there's the elephant in the room too. The thing that really draws a lot of attention to this. This is a drum and bass track. It is hyper complex. I mean, all you had to do was watch the drummer for a second and you can see just how intense the drum part is for this. Listen to the piano, watch the piano player perform this song. You could see how intense this is. This was a song that was designed to be played digitally, to put something that maybe not would be beyond human performance, but certainly would require a ton of skill from multiple musicians in order to pull off something that we do get here. But it's really pushing electronic sound to its limits, which electronic is already pushing music to its limits because it doesn't need people to play it. To see them tackle this and pull it off is a spectacle unto itself. Even I think if this was done a little less perfect, I still would have had my jaw on the floor because the sheer skill still required to reach like 80% of a good playthrough on this. To see them effortlessly, or seemingly effortlessly, I'm sure there's a ton of effort that went into this, pull this off at almost 100%. Just absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, the first thing is just the endurance. Even looking at the bass, which is, I think, the easiest part. There's like 2 or 3 licks the bassist needs to worry about, and you just play them over and over and over. The main thing is the endurance. It is the constant eighth notes on your bowing, and it is those faster runs that you have to worry about on your left hand. It's not a difficult part in complexity. Like I mentioned, it's just 3 licks. But it's difficult to perform, I think, the entirety of it, to keep that tempo going, to keep the perfection going, to lock into that and just be a robot. It's sort of like watching a really solid drummer, not necessarily super complex, not lots of frills, but just absolutely solid, like a human drum machine, just rigid perfection. And it's one of those things where I think it looks easy, but if you're a drummer or if you've ever tried to drum, you understand just how difficult of a task this is. I think the same thing's going on with the bass. It looks easy on paper, probably isn't that bad, but when you actually go to perform it, 7 minutes is just this rigid perfection. Yeah, that's wild. And to do it on the upright too. I mean, first of all, you're fretless, which, I mean, you're replicating pitch perfection here, so you really have to be like super on point with all of your pitches, especially with the piano going into so many of the spicy tones. You're going to want to be as close to the note as possible in order to introduce as little dissonance that's outside of the intended dissonance, because that's just going to compound. You don't want that. But I mean, if this was an electric guitar, you wouldn't even have to worry about bowing it, especially if you're finger picking. I don't know if you noticed, but it really is only like a majority, the 2 highest strings are what are used throughout most of this. We have a couple runs that move to the other 2, but they're just used a lot less, which means there's not a lot going on other than just using your 2 fingers to constantly pick. And even that is using two parts rather than a single bow, which has to do everything. I can only imagine. Just thinking about it makes my elbow hurt a little bit, just the constant back and forth for 7 minutes. And that's only the performance. What about the practice of it? Kind of makes me wonder if like cellists, violinists, if they have like their equivalent of tennis elbow or something. I don't know. It sounds like something that would happen. You got to keep your joint in tip-top shape because you really, especially depending what kind of music you're making, you could really be putting it through the ringer. But yeah, so I wanted to put a little spotlight on the bass here because it's just fantastic at being this foundation for everything else, because everything else is very visually spectacular. The drums are difficult as a core, but when you look at the drummer, you're like, dang, the dude has the hardest part of the song. First of all, the thing I noticed at the beginning is there's very little repetition in it. The dude memorized 7 minutes of totally melodic drum work. Very intense, very complicated rhythms, complicated accent patterns, and doesn't appear to have any sheet music. Just like memorized it all. And we're not talking about, a 7 minute rock track. Maybe you have like 5 or 6 sections. You got 6 rhythms to memorize, 6 core things. And then, honestly, even if it's live, you can make up some drum fills a little bit. They don't have to be perfect. But this is just 7 minutes straight of linear drum playing for the most part. There are some moments where I kind of pick up some smaller loops, but generally speaking, I think the drum part is just fully linear. There's so much to it, and it is super complex. I have no idea how he remembered all this stuff. It's just got to be muscle memory at some point. Not even thinking anymore, just letting the limbs do what they've been trained to do through hours and hours and hours of practice. It is just mind-blowing listening to all of the different velocities, the volumes of all of the different snare hits, and integrating these wild rhythmic bursts within them. Having not only the control of these micro patterns, introducing these 16th notes into those eighth notes, into that rigid eighth note idea, making sure that all of your accents are where they need to be, incorporating, I don't know if we'd call it polyrhythmic ideas, but certainly interesting rhythmic phrases that contrast against the rhythms that the piano is playing, and trying to like balance all of this while also controlling the volume as masterfully as the drummer does, and being all over the kit. It's not like he just sits over here hi-hat and snare. I mean, he's everywhere. It's a spectacle to watch. It is a treat to listen to. I don't know. It's just, this is one of those moments where like my jaw is just on the floor. I'm not a drummer. I have played like simpler drum parts. I used to have an electronic drum kit. I used to play the drum parts to some of my earlier music. Nothing super intricate though. It's once I start like trying to disconnect my limbs so that they can explore polyrhythmic ideas, I'm done. It all sort of like, and it needs to lock in together a little more for me to play it. Like I said, I'm not a great drummer, but I know enough to know when somebody's like beyond the threshold into that realm of just like, geez, dude, how? And to sort of know some of the smaller parts that go into it, some of the lesser well-known skills. And the thing is too, it's also that level of precision as well. It's not just nailing all of the rhythms. It's not just nailing all of the volumes and the dynamics to it. It's doing it all in one take, man. It's just bonkers. And from memory, that's the thing that really kills me. I've memorized, thinking about like linear music, because like I used to play bass in a band. A lot of that, you just memorize a couple of licks, there's your song. But I've memorized 14, maybe 15 minutes of linear trumpet music. No, very few ostinatos in it. Most of it is linear writing. Trumpets play a lot of lead lines. We don't have a lot of looping parts generally, and none of that's ever been as complex as this, though. That's the thing. I could not imagine memorizing this. It just blows my mind. That takes us to the piano. I don't know what to say here, man. In the same vein as the bass and the drums, the piano skill here is ridiculous, both in the performance of it, keeping all of these rhythmic patterns and shifting accent patterns together, while also playing full chords. Like, this takes the drum idea and takes it to the next level. You're not worrying about just four limbs, you're worrying about upwards to 10 fingers at times. and keeping all of them in check at this speed with this precision. I didn't hear any flubs in there, anything at all. Working with the dynamics and the shifting accent patterns, but also they're bringing their own complexity to the composition too. Harmonically, we hear some really spicy stuff in here. I'm not too sure I understand it. It makes me want to check out Squarepusher's original to kind of see what's going on there. It sort of dances between more consonant harmonies and more dissonant harmonies, where consonant feels more connected and dissonant feels more jagged. It feels like the notes are clashing with each other a little bit. And we sort of move between these two modes, occasionally introducing some of the more dissonant tones into the consonant ideas, kind of bringing a little spice to them. Other times just going full on dissonant and bringing these really crunchy chords to the song. But then there's also the extended piano solo, mostly one-handed single note melody stuff, nothing polyphonic for the most part. And this was wild. It felt very jazzy at times. It sort of went to more of an avant-garde type of jazz too, as they incorporated more and more dissonant tones to the mix. It felt fun. It felt impressive. It was ridiculously fast to play. The sheer precision watching this person play the instrument was fascinating. It's so much. And the drummer's not really chilling out much underneath it. The bassist is holding the fort down, but the drummer's still going bonkers. I don't know. I mean, even looking at like what the piano's playing, there's a lot of loops in there. We saw at the end there was a basic like 2-bar ostinato that they played underneath the drum solo. I don't know if it was really a solo, but like the last minute and a half of the song, the piano and bass just kept this one loop going, and the drums did some melodic stuff over it. Felt like a drum solo. So the piano has some ostinatos in there too, but I mean, there's also so many linear parts, just wild, using chords in melodies, right? During the solo section, like I said, monophonic, one note at a time, you're just playing really fast runs, but other parts of the song, they have to carry the chords while also carrying the melody. And the pianist, once again, looked to have memorized all of this. It's just, I don't know, man. I'm blown away by this, right? This sort of like progressive electronic music, drum and bass, I guess, even drill and bass, though, taking this to the next level. No, it's not called drill and bass. What is it called? I know drill's part of it. Anyways, it's like a super intense electronic style. Like this type of music, as I mentioned earlier, it's really meant to, I think, push the bounds of music, not having to worry about human restrictions. You can just make a computer make all these sounds, and it can be as fast or chaotic or extreme as you want. You don't have to worry about it. And these guys, they were like, you know what? Challenge accepted. We're going to play that on real instruments. And it blows my mind how well done it is, honestly. I think that wraps it up for the most part. I mean, not really much I could say about the structure on this. It's rather consistent from start to finish. It doesn't really alter its emotional elements. The atmosphere doesn't really change. I do like how we have a little bit of jazziness snuck in there. I don't know if that's part of the original or not. I like having the piano solo followed by the drum solo. That also feels kind of jazzy. I did call this a jazz rhythm section. Having upright bass like this feels very jazzy. There's a lot of stuff to this that, aside from the composition, have a lot of jazzy components to it. So I kind of like this fusion here. Um, but I don't really have an understanding of like the atmosphere of it. I don't really have an understanding of the narrative the song's trying to tell me. There's no lyrics to kind of clue me into anything either. It's a very noisy, cacophonous song. Just kind of keeps going with its energy and doesn't stop until it stops. You know, the end doesn't have a retardando. It doesn't really have like a new harmonic twist in order to have more of a finality, to have some chords that have a more traditional ending feeling to them. It sort of just stops at the end of a bar. You know, the bass was doing this ostinato, the piano was doing their ostinato, the drums cut out, and they just looped it, and then just didn't loop it. They just stopped the song. Just like the song's been going at 70 miles an hour this whole time, and they just slammed on the brakes, and there's no skidding, there's no any of that. The car just stops so unnaturally. And as a listener, you're just like, oh, okay, it's over. You just have to accept it. So yeah, I don't really have any larger take on this. I'm just in awe of the musicianship, and I just wanted to put a spotlight on all three of these phenomenal musicians and their willingness and bonkers idea to take on a song this complex and to transpose it to acoustic instrumentation. So that's going to wrap it up. Squarepusher's A Journey to Reedham, covered live by, again, this group. Did I? Maybe Dare Hope? It does say Dare Hope presents A Journey to Reedham, and then it gave the names of the three people. I don't know. If anybody has some insight into who these people are so I can properly credit them, let me know, because I'm kind of missing if their group has a name or not. But yeah, these are my thoughts on them. What are yours? Put them down in the comment section. Let me know if you enjoyed this. If you disagree with me on anything, if you want to add on to something I said, maybe you have your own interpretation of things. Maybe there was something wildly bonkers in this that I forgot to bring up and honestly needs a little bit of a spotlight put on. Put all that and any other thoughts you have on the song down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. All right, that wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.